Empires of the ancient world were built from stone, steel, and soldiers. Rome carved roads across continents. Britain stitched together seas with naval power. But the most expensive empire in human history wasn't built by conquering land. It was built by shaping systems. An empire held together not by chains or colonies, but by contracts, currencies, institutions, and the silent gravity of economic dependency. This is the story of how the United States constructed the costliest empire ever known without ever calling itself one. To understand this paradox, we must travel back to a moment when the idea of an American empire would have sounded absurd. 1945. Europe lay in ruins. Asia was shattered. Supply chains, industries, currencies, all collapsed. The old empires had burned themselves to the ground. But across the Atlantic, America stood untouched. Its factories were roaring. Its farmland was producing. Its financial system was intact. The war had destroyed everyone else's house and left America holding the blueprint for a new world. And at the heart of that blueprint was money. At a quiet gathering in Bretton Woods, representatives from 44 nations signed an agreement that would reshape the global economy. The US dollar would become the center of the international monetary system, the anchor of global trade, investment, and stability. America didn't conquer nations, it conquered price tags. With the dollar pegged to gold and every other currency pegged to the dollar, Washington created a financial architecture where global prosperity depended on American stability. But empires, even invisible ones, come with costs. For the US, the price was staggering. It had to supply the world with dollars. And that meant running deficits, financing trade imbalances, and becoming the consumer of last resort for the planet. As Europe and Japan rebuilt, America kept buying, importing, spending, pouring trillions into global circulation. It was the world's engine, but also the world's wallet. Then came the Cold War, the moment the American empire became more than financial. Soviet expansion wasn't met with legions, it was met with loans, aid packages, military bases, security guarantees. From Korea to Germany, from Turkey to Japan, the U.S. began constructing a vast network of influence held together by two things: protection and payment. Nations didn't join because they were conquered. They joined because the alternative, being left outside the American system, was far more dangerous. But such alliances weren't free. Maintaining troops overseas, subsidizing allies, funding technological competition. These became the hidden costs of empire. America wasn't just protecting itself. It was underwriting the stability of half the world. Yet the real turning point came in 1971, when President Nixon severed the dollar's link to gold. The global economy teetered. But what followed was one of the greatest financial power plays in history. The dollar remained the world's reserve currency by force of habit, by scale, and by sheer economic gravity. If a nation wanted to trade oil, buy commodities, or borrow money, it still needed US dollars. America had built an empire out of liquidity. And then came the military dimension. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the US didn't shrink its presence. It expanded, building the most expensive military system ever constructed. Global surveillance networks, aircraft carriers the size of cities, satellites, logistics systems, and alliances stretching across continents. Not to conquer, but to guarantee a kind of global order where trade routes remained open, markets predictable, and the dollar indispensable. But here's the part rarely discussed. Every guarantee, every alliance, every intervention carried a price. And over decades, the bill ballooned. By the early 21st century, America's empire, military, economic, cultural cost, trillions annually. Unlike Rome, which taxed subjects, the U.S. often subsidized them. Unlike Britain, which extracted wealth, America often imported more than it exported, consuming others' goods in exchange for providing security and financial stability. This created the most unusual empire in history, one where the imperial center paid for the periphery, not the other way around. A system where influence was bought with deficits, protected with military reach, and enforced through the dominance of its currency. But the costliest chapter was yet to come. After September 11th, America launched wars that consumed trillions, wars that reshaped geopolitics, drained national wealth, and exposed the limits of military influence. Meanwhile, the financial crisis of 2008 revealed another truth. The world depended so heavily on the American financial system that when Wall Street fell, the global economy fell with it. The U.S. Federal Reserve became the lender of last resort for the entire planet. Trillions were printed, markets stabilized, and the American empire grew even deeper, not through expansion, but through necessity. Today, the price tag of maintaining this system, the military footprint, the economic obligations, the global security guarantees, the technological race, is larger than the GDP of most countries. But the real cost is something harder to measure: responsibility. Because if the world runs on American systems, America must keep them running. And when those systems falter, the empire trembles. Yet for all its costs, America built something unprecedented. An empire held together not by conquest, but by connectivity. Not by the sword, but by the supply chain. Not by tribute, but by trust. An empire whose greatest weapon isn't a missile, but a currency. The question now is not how America built this empire. It is whether the world, and America itself, can afford to keep it. To understand the true cost of America's empire, we must look at what? The United States built beyond borders, not physical territory, but the global architecture that keeps the modern world functioning. Consider the oceans. For centuries, trade routes were battlegrounds. Pirates, rival empires, collapsing kingdoms. The sea was chaos. But after World War II, something extraordinary happened. The U.S. Navy became the de facto guardian of global shipping. It patrolled trade lanes from the Persian Gulf to the South China Sea, keeping oil flowing, goods moving, markets alive. No nation paid taxes for this service. No formal empire existed. But every container ship that crossed the Pacific did so under the shadow of American protection. This wasn't charity. It was strategy. The U.S. ensured global trade worked, and in doing so, it ensured the world needed the dollar to trade. But this protection came with a price. Aircraft carriers cost billions. Bases cost billions. Intelligence networks cost billions. America built the most expensive insurance policy in history, making global commerce possible while bearing most of the financial burden itself. Then came technology. The internet, GPS, satellite networks, fiber optics. Many of the systems that run the modern world originated from U.S. defense projects. These became global utilities. Every smartphone, every international payment, every navigation system relies on American-built infrastructure. The U.S. didn't just create markets. It created the tools that markets run on. But there's a hidden cost. Maintaining technological dominance requires perpetual investment in research, defense, cybersecurity, AI, space infrastructure. For decades, America has spent more on innovation security than most nations spend on everything they have. And yet, the empire's most expensive component isn't military or technological. It's psychological. The United States built a confidence empire. Foreign investors store their wealth in American banks. Nations keep U.S. Treasury bonds as reserves. Global markets react instantly to Federal Reserve decisions. When crisis hits, anywhere, the world runs toward the dollar, not away from it. This trust props up the dollar, and maintaining that trust is enormously costly. Not in gold, but in credibility, stability, and geopolitical engagement. But this empire, like all empires, faces challenges. China's rise, fragmented trade blocs, digital currencies, political polarization, debt levels unprecedented in U.S. history, and something even more dangerous, fatigue. Because unlike traditional empires, America cannot withdraw inward without reshaping the global order. If it pulls back security guarantees, regional powers escalate. If it reduces global liquidity, economies crash. If it abandons trade networks, supply chains fracture. The world is built on American scaffolding. Removing even one beam sends tremors across continents. This is why economists refer to the U.S. role as the hegemon's trap. The more indispensable a country becomes, the more expensive it is to remain so. And yet, the story of America's empire is not just about cost. It's about consequences. After 80 years of shaping the world system, the United States created both extraordinary prosperity and extraordinary dependency. Emerging markets grew because American consumers bought their goods. Stable prices depended on the dollar. Global security relied on U.S. power projection. And now, for the first time, many nations want alternatives. But here's the twist most people overlook. Even as the world seeks escape from American influence, it remains bound to it. Oil is still priced in dollars. Central banks still hoard U.S. bonds. Tech companies still run on U.S. infrastructure. Shipping lanes still rely on American naval power. Financial crises still require the Federal Reserve's intervention. The empire persists because the world, knowingly or not, continues to pay into its system. So how did America build the most expensive empire in history? Not by conquering territory, but by conquering necessity. By making the world dependent on its currency, its security, its technology, its stability. An empire not of land, but of leverage. The final question is not whether America intended to build an empire. The question is whether anyone, including America, can afford the one that now exists.